is episode 272 of Mitolife Radio. I'm Matt Blackburn, your host, and I have a very controversial show for you. I'm interviewing Zoltan Istvan. Zoltan ran for president, actually, under the Transhumanist Party. And if you're not familiar with transhumanism, it's the idea of using technology and science to improve the health of humanity, often through very controversial means. How I got connected to this world was several years ago. This must have been back around 2015 or 2016. I had a friend named Rowan Horn, and he invited me to a transhumanism rally when I was living in Chula Vista, San Diego, and it was in downtown San Diego. So I went there, and there were people that were into physical immortality and using really advanced futuristic ideas and technology to radically extend human lifespan and just human health overall. So I ended up hanging out with them. I ended up in Zoltan's documentary, which is the Immortality Bus. I think there were some clips of me in that on YouTube, and then ended up having dinner. We went to a little pizza place in downtown San Diego, and I sat down across from Zoltan and had interesting conversations with a small group of guys about the future. So in my community, the natural health community, what I've seen is people are really resistant to futuristic ideas. What's trending now and has been trending for a while are traditional ways of living, homesteading, and all that stuff's great. I homestead. I live rurally. I have animals. I have a garden. I kind of live a prepping lifestyle where I'm preparing for the worst, but still enjoying all of the things that civilization has to offer. But what I've noticed through the memosphere in the natural health community is this massive aggressive attitude towards anything new. Not only new supplements, but just new technology, electric cars, whether it's the Apple Vision Pro, which, by the way, augmented reality, virtual reality has been used to cure people of phobias. So that application is just priceless for that reason alone. I think a lot of the aggressiveness towards these new things come from fear. That's usually what's behind anger. We're wired to be afraid of change. But I often think of adaptability, and I think with the rapidly changing world that we're in, it's more important than ever to be open to new ideas, as crazy as they might sound, and look for really innovative solutions for these modern problems. So that was probably one of the longest introduction rants I've ever done for a show, but I'm just really passionate about this stuff because I just see the rampant programming and kind of hive mind hate towards new technology, and it just blows my mind. So I'm going to cut myself off here from ranting further. Zoltan, as I mentioned, ran for president. He wrote a book called The Transhumanist Wager about 11 years ago. He's written articles for many different news outlets, the New York Times, Vice. He's been on Joe Rogan's show, London Real. He says in this interview, really any media outlet that would interview him to get this topic out there, he would go on the show. I just think he's really fascinating to listen to. And I think we need to talk more about this stuff because I don't think people realize how quickly this technology is advancing as far as AGI, artificial general intelligence. In the show, we talk about ChatGPT, the replacement of jobs. I ask him about the replacement of relationships, which is probably the most controversial thing in this entire topic to me anyway, is these home droids not only doing our laundry, doing the dishes and cleaning, which already replaces traditional gender role, but also replacing the physical and romantic aspect of human male female interaction living together in a home. So I love thinking about this stuff because I don't think it's 50 years down the road. I think it's 5 to 10 years down the road. I think people have no clue how quickly we're moving towards this reality. And some of this is in movies. So I bring up Deus Ex Machina, the movie Her, which I haven't seen yet, Blade Runner 2049, especially the remake, one of my favorite movies, if not my favorite movie. I ask him about overpopulation, his thoughts on Neuralink, his tips for staying healthy, just in general, without using transhumanism ideas. If you enjoy thinking about the future like I do, or you really enjoy futuristic sci-fi, often dystopian movies, then you'll really enjoy this interview. Here is Zoltan Istvan. All right, we're here with Zoltan Istvan. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I was just telling you the last time I saw you was down in San Diego for the Transhumanist rally. You were doing the rounds in the so-called Immortality Bus, and we sat down for a pizza dinner in downtown San Diego, and it was fun to meet people and have these interesting conversations that I've never had before. It's such an interesting topic of conversation that could go so many directions. How did you get interested in this whole topic of the future and transhumanism, and what kind of piqued your interest with all this?
Well, I was working for National Geographic, and I had a kind of a close call with a landmine. This is in my 20s, and it made me realize that I could die at any moment. So I was covering kind of conflict zones for them, and it was a great life. Working for National Geographic, I went abroad, doing all these amazing stories. But when it came to kind of coming to a point close to dying, I really freaked out. And since I was a non-religious person or a non-believer, that had a huge impact on my psyche. And so I began looking around for ways to overcome death with science and technology. And that's when I discovered that there really was this transhumanism movement. I mean, I'd already known about transhumanism, but it was kind of like a science fiction concept. But all of a sudden, I realized there were scientists and engineers, and people working to try to conquer death. And that really appealed to me. So that's how I got into transhumanism. But of course, transhumanism is much more than just conquering death. It's kind of becoming like super people, almost godlike people, which of course is controversial for your podcast, but that's really what it's about.
Yeah, becoming like superhumans, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because in my field, a lot of people are doing that using, natural methods like sunlight and being barefoot and cold baths. All this is really trending now. But where I'm at, I mean, I have tons of technology here, and I think, hyperbaric chambers or even CO2 therapy. There's so many interesting technologies that can really improve our health. So that's what kind of got me into this whole topic of transhumanism. Is using technology to better your health is kind of a humanist thing, isn't it? Or
I would say so, but I think what people get caught on is that the transhumanism is a loaded word. And it doesn't matter what background you come from. If it's a religious background, it's a secular background, it's a scholastic background, everybody sort of is like, oh, well, you're trying to play God. And actually, transhumanism is really just trying to make it so that we live better, longer, and that we can really take more control over our environment. Like, many transhumanists would say it's sad that if the temperature gets too cold, we die. Or it's sad that if I don't have a glass of water for 72 hours, our entire life is threatened. So transhumanists want to overcome a lot of these biological barriers. And I think that's really the essence of it. So when the stuff you're talking about, I looked at your website earlier, great stuff on it. That's all, in my opinion, very transhumanist minded stuff. We're all going the same direction. We all would like a better life. That's really what it's about. The question is, the terms, do they scare us? Are they loaded? Do they cause controversy? But nobody can really argue against trying to increase the way that they improve their lives. And then I think that's, whether it's for your children, your parents, yourself, your spouse, whatever it is, we're all trying to have a better life. And that's really at the core of what transhumanism is.
Awesome. Can you describe what the transhumanist wager is, just simply?
Yeah, absolutely. So the transhumanist wager, first off, it's my book, and it kind of launched me to public personhood or whatever it is. I don't know. But I wrote a book about 11 or 12 years ago now. I started 15 years ago. It took me 4 years to write. And it's mirrored off Pascal's wager, except instead of using God to achieve a perfect life or an indefinite lifespan in heaven, you're using transhumanism to overcome death and hopefully achieve a perfect lifespan. So it's called the transhumanist wager instead of Pascal's wager. And essentially just argues that we should be dedicating all our energy and all our time to making this transhumanist wager, to putting our energy and resources into science and technology to make our lives dramatically better. And I know that sounds like, oh, well, we're already doing it, but not really. Most people are like going on vacation. Most people are paying taxes. Most people are just, watching football on Sundays. I mean, a real transhumanist is kind of dedicated night and day to improving their livelihood so that they don't have to die. And that's really what the transhumanist wager is. It's a lifestyle change. It's not that, I like good health 10 or 15% of the time. It's, I like good health 95% of the time. And maybe there's a few bit a percent of fun and a few bit of, spending time with the family or whatever it is. So the transhumanist wager is this hardcore idea of dedicating your life to science and technology and really putting all your resources and energy into that, overcoming death and into becoming a true superhuman.
That's awesome. Well, I've been listening to a lot of different interviews and they're all amazing. And you say different things in each one, which is awesome. And one thing you brought up quite a bit is ChatGPT. And I've been playing around with it, but what I'm really disappointed with it is when it comes to health information and clinical studies. And, I've gotten so into the weeds with underground health stuff, like the benefits of aspirin for various things like low dose aspirin, or even the benefits of Cialis to Tadalafil for prostate cancer prevention, and like these interesting things that we just don't hear about. And it would be so nice to just type into ChatGPT, how do I protect myself from prostate cancer? It's like, oh, the active ingredient in Cialis plus this and this and this and this. Because we're at the place now, like my community, where you have basically people like me, like health influencers, that are deciphering the studies in an imperfect way, right? Because nobody's perfect in reading these clinical studies. But my mind always just goes to that would be the best use of ChatGPT if we could ask it health questions and there's no debating whether aspirin's good or for us or whatever. It's just like, here are the facts. And I went through 20,000 clinical studies and these are all the things you could do for this health condition. Have you gone down that train of thought ever? Or?
Yeah, sure. So let me just say first off, we have to be very careful. It's ChatGPT is almost the same as getting all your news from CNN. It's like you have to use the other generative AIs, because if you do, you're only looking at a window of one company that is feeding you what they think. And it's like when I look at media these days, I go everything from Zero Hedge to the New York Times to Fox and CNN combined to what else are the obscure people talking about? A bunch of the stack stuff. Because I just don't really believe in a lot of it anymore. I think after COVID, everybody is like, even people that are mainstream, sort of like myself, are like, wow, I don't trust a lot of it. And so I think when you're using generative AI, you need to use all of them across the board and ask the same question. The problem is it's getting expensive because you got to subscribe to get the right ones. But either way, that's my first advice. And I think the second piece really here is that I think we need to give it a little bit more time. Generative AI has come up on the market. ChatGPT stunned the world. Me too. I was just like, wow. As a journalist, I was like, oh God, all these jobs gone. But the point is that there's going to be another 1 to 2 years before we can ask it questions and say, I want the alternative answer to prostate cancer. I don't want what the big giant pharma companies are feeding you information. I want the alternative answer. I want the answer that this broadcaster said and this person said combined, and maybe that'll give you a little bit of a a wiggle room of what you might want to hear, or at least, because I think a lot of us know sort of what we're looking for. We're basically skeptical of big pharma. We're skeptical of what the media they're feeding us. So we know that there's an alternative truth out there, but we're not exactly sure what it is. But we can get a lot closer to it. I'm not sure we're ever going to get perfectly to it, but I think we can get a lot closer to it and say, look, analyze these 20,000 studies, leave out those two big ones that the pharma companies suggested, and now let's see what happens. And so I think as you approach generative AI and ChatGPT, you have to approach as you would approach media. You have to approach it with all right, this one is from this company and has this agenda. I want all of them combined, and I would like to see an answer that combines the best of them, or maybe all of them, or maybe some of them not even on. So that's really important, because we're all being, it's an agenda that we're being fed. And so we have to be careful to weed through that.
Yeah. There's a whole controversial aspect. Like, didn't they have to shut down one of the AI systems because it was giving really controversial answers to the questions that were being asked? Did you hear about that?
I did, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's multiple AIs that have had to be shut down or redone and things like that. I mean, like I said, these things are too new, and all of a sudden there's a ton of lawsuits coming as well, because like the New York Times is suing them, saying you're using our information. But we all know that the New York Times has a very specific kind of agenda set, and for many people that's fine. But for those maybe on the hard right, or maybe those in the underground, they're probably not at all interested. I was just speaking with. I was just in the country of Georgia, and I had a chance to speak to a lot of libertarians, and many of them said, "Look, I don't read the New York Times. I haven't looked at it in years." And even though that's perhaps the most popular paper in the United States, the point of the story is that their understanding and their take on things is not from that side. They want to have alternative news, and they want to get it from a different feed. And I think the same thing is going to be happening with ChatGPT or with the other generative AIs. We got to be very careful, because otherwise you're being fed something that is probably sponsored by corporate dollars, and that's not what we want. We want honesty. We want truth.
Yeah. And an interesting part of ChatGPT is the replacement of jobs. And I've heard you talk about replacing journalists and replacing doctors. And I think that's where a lot of the resistance to these ideas that you talk about come from, because people feel threatened if jobs are going to be replaced, and even relationships, which I want to get into a little bit with AI. But that's interesting. I've heard you say in a show, you're like, whatever job you have, save as much money as possible. Get a car that doesn't have a microchip in it.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, so, a little background. I'm just finishing my graduate degree at the University of Oxford. I have some of the best AI professors in the world over me, teaching me. And when ChatGPT came out about, 20 months ago, whatever it is, not one of them knew about it. Not one of them had heard in the grapevine that it was coming. We all woke up one morning and someone said, "Oh, go to this site and ask it to write a 3,000-word essay on microbiology, intertwined in Amsterdam," or something like that. Something weird, obscure topic. And all of a sudden, it did it perfectly, and we were like, "Shit! This is crazy. This is crazy how smart it is." The point of the story is that no matter where you're at, I think only a handful of people really have the advantage of knowing what's going to happen next. None of the Oxford professors were aware that an AI was that advanced. It was probably 3 to 4 years more advanced than they were teaching, here at one of the world's best universities. So I think what I'm trying to say is, like, it's very difficult to trust what you hear and what you say. But one thing is for sure, once you've used ChatGPT, you realize that, especially like as a journalist, your job is at stake, because this thing can do it good today, but what's it going to do it like in 1 year? And the same thing, I have a bunch of film director friends, and they're like, "Well, it's good at writing." And then all of a sudden, it started to become good at creating video on demand in 10 seconds time, just by saying, create a girl playing with a kitten and a butterfly in the background, and they did it. And so now everyone else's jobs are threatened. And now we're starting to think, well, how far go? Can it trade stocks? Yes, it can. Can it maybe be combined with a Tesla robot to do drywalling and painting? Yes, it can, probably by 2025. Well, wait a sec. Where does that leave people? And the idea is, therefore, I think we're all going to be threatened. However, hopefully the governments will work out some kind of method where even, I'm still a believer that AI can make it so that we can work less and still be just as wealthy or have just as high of a standard of living. I'm not sure how that's going to work out, how if capitalism has to succumb somehow or whatever. But the point of the story is I still think AI is beneficial as long as it doesn't go into like a Terminator scenario. And I'm not really worried about that at the moment. What I'm more worried about is the fact that as a journalist, this thing can write, 100 times quicker than I can and probably more eloquently.
Absolutely. Yeah. I saw the Tesla bot for the first time last year. Went to Seattle area for the first time. I'm in North Idaho, and it it looks intimidating, but I think Elon said he's making it so you could run away from it. So it can't sprint after you if it wants to chase you. But yeah, that's one of the most interesting things to me is, say, the Tesla bot, for example, replacing cooking and washing and doing laundry. And I saw an interview recently where they were talking about AI replacing girlfriends. And I think right now they have like apps, but I think now they're starting to integrate it with like sex dolls, and it's getting super crazy. And then at some point it's going to be almost like a Tesla bot that's attractive. You can choose your
No.
what you like. And I think that's a huge disruption to that will be a huge disruption to the male and female dynamics. I mean, we already have feminism and then MGTOW on the other side. And it's like there's already this battling, right, between genders. But I think it's going to reach an interesting point once, like, we might not even need the other anymore.
Yeah. Well, let me say, I've seen some of these bots up front that look human, and they, unless you're within 3 feet, 3 feet, so that's just like, this, you really can't tell the difference at this point. And that's today. And let me just give you a little background. Tesla is doing a great bot, but Tesla is one of 50 companies out there in the world, of which 20 are in Silicon Valley, that are pushing for the same type of thing. In the same way you have Tesla and all these other electric car companies, there are a number of, dozens of other companies. So it's not just one there are billions and billions of dollars flowing in to the robot world that's going to be taking on the generative AI in its head and then being able to wash your dishes. And I think Panasonic last week said they now have their model that can already start doing basic cooking and basic dishes on the market. Just came on the market last week. So we're already at this stage. And of course, it's really expensive. It's like 50, 60. So, no, the normal person's not going to afford it for 1 to 2 to 3 years. But eventually, it's going to be just like electric cars where, hey, it's $35,000. I guess I can do it. The average person can do it. And that's probably 2 to 3 years away. So it will be in our households. And if they look 10 times more beautiful than your wife, they look like any supermodel that you see on the big TV screen, and they're super nice, and they're obviously designed so you can have sex with them, and it feels very similar. There's going to be I don't know if it's a significant portion, but a large portion of people that will say, you know what, it's just so much easier than dealing with the real thing. Because let's be honest, relationships are tough. I've been married 16 years, happily married, but it's not without tough. It's tough. You got to deal with somebody entirely different who has different agendas, different ideas, especially with raising children. And here you might have a gorgeous robot bot that, answers your every call and does everything you want. So I think a portion of people are probably going to go for that. And so will women. Women may want security. Well, these things provide excellent security. They can hear things when they never sleep, so it can go both ways. You're right. It could be an enormous disruption to society. And I'm not really sure if that's a good or bad thing. Mostly I support transhumanism. But when it comes to like the different agendas of sex, I'm not sure this really is a good thing, because it may make it so a lot of people don't want to have relationships with humans, which are tough, as we've discussed. They're just simply, I have 2 daughters. My relationship with my daughters is a difficult process. They're growing up. One's a teenager. I mean, if she was a robot, I'd say, hey, just do your homework. But that's not what it's about anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to get so interesting. And I haven't seen Her. I think you've referred to that Joaquin Phoenix movie. I did see the remake of Blade Runner, where I think her name was Joy. He had it was like a hologram girlfriend. which had a really interesting take on the AI thing. Because I think there was a scene, spoiler alert, where he pretty much brought in like a prostitute, and then the AI went into her body, and then they were able to interact physically. So it's yeah, I wonder if the hologram thing would be easier than the actual physical droid for companies to do. maybe
Yeah,
it's hard.
yeah, and so I wrote an article for Vice a long time ago, because this was even during one of my presidential campaigns. They put me onto the coolest virtual reality, and it was kind of not a sex thing. It was actually falling in love with another woman. And after like 1 minute, I took the thing off, because there's this virtual avatar that grabs your hand. You have on this like haptic suit, and it just feels so real. And I was like, wait, I'm married. I can't hold someone else's hand, and I took it off in front of like, 50 people. And it's really interesting, because they design these things. So, and you need to see Her. And the reason why Her is so good is because they create the ideal girlfriend, like the ideal partner who just really supports you. She's fun and independent on her own. Whatever idea you have, that's a great idea. Let's do. It's not something like, trite or something like that. It's really like, wow, this is the one. And I feel like that's the danger here, is that you can program those things to hear everything you want to hear. And it's not like it's just totally boring, because they'll have enough independence so you're still attracted. They'll have enough spontaneity. That happens in Her. The Her figures out how much independence her boyfriend wants versus, how much she should take. And they know it from an algorithmic perspective. And that's dangerous, because each person has their own levels of what kind of person they want, what kind of freedom they want to give it that makes them feel comfortable. And if somebody can figure out that exact breaking point, or the exact point that's perfect, they can easily say, wow, she's totally committed to me. And at the same time, she's her own person. And yet it's just an algorithm that's figured out who you are. So it's very dangerous.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about the movies, and most of them, Terminator obviously is a big one. Most of them are negative about dystopian future. I mean, I think about Elysium, AI is used to like enslave humanity. And then Deus Ex Machina, I saw for the first time last year, where the AI like seduces and manipulates the guy to escape the compound, And so there's not many I would say Blade Runner was kind of a neutral movie about that, and maybe Her as well, where they're not really they're not really evil, right? They're not manipulative.
Yeah, no. The Ex Machina, that movie is super interesting, because again, that robot figures out exactly what it is that this boy or this man needs in order to free her. And he doesn't realize at the end that it was just contrived. He's being played like like some really hot chick who's super smart playing a rich guy, And unfortunately, he gets played. And I think that's one of the things we don't understand when we're even dealing with things like Facebook or dealing with social media, that what you read is based on what the algorithm of Facebook or Twitter put out to you. It's not based on, oh, this person just wrote me. Blah, blah, blah. And, the person wrote you because the algorithm put you to that person, knowing that probably that person would write you. And so we're living in a world of algorithms already, which is incredibly scary, because I don't know if I want, it's again like media. What's the agenda of that company? What's the bottom line? Maybe the bottom line is to make money, but maybe it's a little political. Maybe I don't like the politics of that company. And we're finding that out all day long. And, it's just a little scary, because we realizing we have a lot less control than we thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I think some people talk about the echo chamber, and I see it so often in my natural health community, where these ideas get introduced and then they get so popular. And I've been responsible, unfortunately, for some of them. And, everybody has iron overload or something, for example. And it's like, well, no, there's a nuance there. And if you just keep hearing this from a lot of influential people, you'll start to believe it. But maybe it's just the algorithm that's showing it to you because it's trendy. It's not necessarily true. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then you find out somebody, with a certain thing, there's maybe a corporation behind it or a political agenda behind it. And then it's just terrible, because then you're like, I've been played, just like the movie, where humans are being played by these, and I mean played literally, like the piano by these robots.
So with lifespan extension, have you have you talked about overpopulation and because that's seems like people, I think Elon said you could fit the whole Earth in Texas, right? Or something like that. Are there misconceptions about the world being overpopulated in your opinion, or?
I think right now everyone talks about overpopulation as a huge detriment to the environment. And we do have environmental issues happening. There's no question that humans are going about destroying things and consuming things. But I think part of the problem is when you really look at what the bottom 90% of the population is doing and compared to maybe the top 1%, I mean, the classic one is the Taylor Swift who talks about the environment, protects it, but flies her jet everywhere else. And I don't mean to pick on her or anyone because my kids love her music. But the point is, there's the 1% is doing a huge amount of what we would call consumption of the planet, and not just the 1%, the top 10%. So I think if we balanced out things a bit better, we could have a lot more people, but we probably couldn't have the uber rich doing anything and everything that they wanted. I mean, when you go off and build a 200-foot yacht and the amount of resources that takes just so you can go on it, that's a dilemma, I think. Yeah. And I'm not even saying, because I'm kind of a libertarian, so I'm like, let people do what they want to do. Mm-hmm. But the point of the story is that if you're looking at it from an environmental perspective, too few people are doing too much of the damage. And therefore, if we could balance that out, we could probably fit twice the population. I mean, my estimates, based on some of the stuff I did at Oxford, say that we could fit maybe 18 to 20 billion people on planet Earth and still keep it pristine. But that top 1% wouldn't have quite that standard of living that they have where they have anything they want all the time.
Yeah. Maybe that's where we look at off planet, right? And it kind of expanding and
let them go off planet and have that 1% and have whatever they want somewhere else and leave us to enjoy the forest and stuff. And again, I'm not I'm not one of the conspiracy theorists where I'm thinking that overpopulation is harming everything, or the planet is getting too warm, or this and that. I mean, there are some trends that I see in science, but I think what's happening really is that it's just an unfair balance right now. And I'm not even sure it's unfair. What I'm just saying is there's a balance. If we corrected it, more people would be happy. And we have to ask ourselves, how many, unhappy people should we allow so that 2 people or 100 people can have anything that they want? And again, those are philosophical questions. I'm not really coming down on either side, but I do see the problem when Davos, the World Economic Forum, has 50 private jets fly in to talk about saving the planet. Yeah. You got to think, you guys. This is just simply, my family and I just went to Georgia and we all flew economy class, all 4 of us and the kids. And I thought, well, it's okay because we're all flying economy class. We're not in a private jet, blah, blah, blah. That's how vacations work. If everyone did that, it'd be okay. But if everyone on that plane flew their own private jet, I mean, the amount of environmental damage would be dramatically more. And of course, that's what's happening with that top 1% right now, or top 0%.
Yeah. Yeah. In the health community, I'd say the overwhelming majority hates electric cars, and you referred to them earlier. And where my brain goes, I mean, they go to the mining of lithium and the child labor, and then I research oil refining and all the minerals and resources that uses up. And they're both, I mean, they're both not perfect, right? But I would prefer to breathe cleaner air. So I think it's a step in the right direction. I'm even looking at a company down in SoCal that making a solar car. So it's a aerodynamic solar car that's super hyper efficient. I think those are great advancements, and everyone resists it. It gets so political because, like you said, they kind of lump it in with the World Economic Forum, and you'll eat bugs and own nothing and be happy and all that. So.
Yeah. Well, I think. I think when you look at science, you have to say there are certain breakthroughs that make a huge difference. And one thing I think we can all agree on is that, cars do cause a huge amount of bad air to the planet and simply are not good. If we had a choice, if I was running for office, what I would say is I would like to start a fund, maybe, 1 or 2% of whatever cars make, we would put into this fund, and that fund would be directly to creating the solar car. There's no question that all of us would be happy with a solar car if it was efficient and cool and could do that. Because now we're talking literally no waste of resources. You don't have to get the power, because even, obviously the Teslas use like 70 or 80% of the power consumption. So if you're not producing, combustion out of your car, it's being produced at some giant factory 100 miles from you into the ozone too. But solar cars could be something entirely different. The only thing you have is the actual creation of the car that's perhaps creating any kind of problems. So that's a breakthrough that literally changes the way we do things. And so there are certain breakthroughs in science. It's not just a leap up. All of a sudden, it's like 10 leaps up. And we've had this in science. Anesthesia, for example, the idea that we can, change fix people in surgery when they're under, so that they weren't freaking out. I mean, that changed medicine dramatically. So all of a sudden, we could do all sorts of internal surgeries that we never could have done before, because the person would have been screaming, saying, "Get out of my stomach!" So there are certain inventions and technologies that we come across that change life. And I think solar cars would be one of them. Then we wouldn't have the gas, we wouldn't have the solar, the electric, we wouldn't have all these different things. It would just be like, hey, all of us use the sun. It's really simple.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about Neuralink, because it's been fascinating for me to watch that advancement. And I'm sure, like you mentioned with the bot, there's probably several companies that are working on technology like that. But what do you think that's going to be a popular consumer product within the next 5 to 10 years? Or
5 years is a little bit fast. And the reason is because of bureaucracy of government. I mean, we probably would have already had it here had we, for example, just so your listeners know, to get a medical device through is usually an 8 to 12 year process of approvals. So if you're thinking about it now, you're thinking, in 8 to 12 years, I'll have this, I'll be wearing something or have a headset or an implant on my head or whatever. But I mean, the world's so different. I mean, imagine ChatGPT came out 20 months ago, and now you're talking 10 years. I mean, AI could be a million times smarter than us by then. Yeah. And so who cares whether Neuralink comes out? I actually had an article out in Newsweek this morning, an opinion piece. If you go to the homepage of Newsweek, it's right there. And it was on the idea that we're looking at brainwave tech and companies like Neuralink all wrong. And the reason is because AI is going to be embedded into everything, every technology we have within a few years' time. So in 10 years, when they finally approve the Neuralink device, we can actually play chess in our minds. AI is going to be directly connected, have access to our thoughts and our brains. That's not what I want. I mean, I don't want an AI to read my mind. I mean, I'm a transhumanist, and I think Neuralink is awesome, but I don't want the AI to read it or to have control or to be able to hack it. That's a bridge too far for this transhumanist. And yet AI is going to be all sort of like potentially all powerful, or at least integrated in everything. So my article in Newsweek argues that we should be creating ways that are able to not allow AI into our heads. Maybe they're Faraday cages, these cages that block Wi-Fi signals. Maybe there's random encryption generators that constantly change. Could be a whole bunch of different ways. But the bottom line is no one's going to put a Neuralink into their brain if AI can read it all, because it's going to just read your thoughts. And imagine if shared it with your spouse, your friends, your parents. I mean, this is not there's too much at stake with privacy. And the problem is the Neuralink device will be approved in 10 years' time. And by then, how integrated will AI be in everything? So nobody's thinking about brainwave technology yet. They're just like, oh, this is great. And it is great. But it's only great if you have a medical need that actually fixes a paralysis like the guy had at Neuralink, so he could walk or think and things like that. Then all of a sudden it's useful. But for you and I to use Neuralink to do this, I would be happy to have our conversation in our brains, as long as you didn't have access to my thoughts and only to what I said. But if there's an AI that's the construct and it's making it possible, no way, man. It's just like I don't want to be hacked. I don't want you to know what I'm thinking.
Yeah. I think I've heard the most interesting argument that Elon's made in favor of Neuralink is that it's going to make us competitive with AI. And that kind of clashes with what you just said, because there's a lot of thoughts of humans becoming obsolete, right? We talked about jobs going away, potentially relationships. So there's this, I think you've talked about meaning in other shows and how we're going to have to find new meaning. And you think we will, right? After all this.
Yeah. I mean, no offense to Elon, but that's simply not true, that we're going to put on, a Neuralink and be as competitive with AI. we're never going to be able to produce a 3,000 word essay in, a half a second as ChatGPT does right now. And the reason is because the way our brains are structured, unless we can have like multiple centers of consciousness that somehow the AI does, maybe that's possible. The chips do, maybe multiple Neuralinks. It simply doesn't work. I mean, the problem is the computer is doing multiple processes in real time, billions of them essentially. And that's today. It might be doing, I just did one of my Oxford papers. It was something, I forgot the number, but it's like a trillion times a trillion times a trillion. That's what supercomputers are doing today. And this is growing exponentially. So by the time we're talking 5 years' time, it's going to be such a large number. And only a computer can have answers for all that at once. Our brain can only focus right now on this conversation, on this train of thought. Well, a computer can can solve a million math equation all at once, all these answers at once. Its consciousness or its sense of, answers is very different than ours. And so I'm not sure just because we connect, we might have Google Maps in our brain. We might say, oh, I want to trade Bitcoin, and, or you and I can do this podcast, where we're still just on a single level, a linear type of thinking. Like you talk to me, I talk to you, and that's it. Whereas AI has a million answers all at once, a million AIs talking to a million AIs at once and understanding. And that's where there's no competition, I think. What's important, though, might be that we could protect ourselves in some way so that we could retain our brains and still be online with our heads and not be watched precisely. And that can either be through encryption that does random things, kind of like crypto. We figured out a way with crypto that no one can kind of hack Bitcoin at the moment. And there may be a way to have our thoughts tied into the online without being hacked. Again, I'm not sure if that's really possible, but those are some of the thinkings of the latest scientific community.
It's a great points. Yeah, there's been some funny internet memes around Neuralink, like when you can't afford the ad-free version, and there's like commercials popping up in someone's head.
Yeah, no, and that's going to be such a bummer because it's your brain that we're talking about, and there's nowhere else to go. Anytime in the world we just turn off our computer and go for a walk, and I'm in the forest, or I'm in the wherever it is. But once it's in your head, it's gone. There's nowhere else to go. And I think even as a transhumanist, I want to become as powerful as I could become, but I don't know if letting the genie out of the bottle with AI is really the best way for our species to become transhuman. It may mean that AI becomes transhuman and we become the pets or the ants, or the bugs. If you've seen what is the mind body problem or the 3-body problem on Netflix, we all become bugs essentially compared to the intelligences out there because they see us as we would see a mosquito.
Interesting. Yeah. Ever since I saw the movie Elysium, I always loved the exoskeleton idea, and not that it's like drilled into the skin. I don't like that part, but just like something you could wear to become faster and stronger. And actually, I think in June, there's a couple companies like Kickstarter companies that made like leg attachments so you could run faster, scale a mountain easier. And it's like battery operated to basically lift your legs. And I think stuff like that is awesome, and it's non-invasive and it's beneficial. I mean, makes backpacking easier, right?
No, and I would even be willing to go for the one that's built into your system. I don't mind that kind of technology. I think just like we said, when the problem is a lot of this technology is going to be microchip oriented, and if it's microchip oriented, it's probably susceptible to AI or susceptible to hacking and things like that, and that becomes a big challenge as opposed to just having like super muscles like an Olympian's DNA or something like that. But I have personally seen somebody get out of a wheelchair for the first time using an exoskeleton suit, and it makes you cry. It's like person been in the wheelchair 17 years, and all of a sudden they finally get out on stage, and you're like, it's crazy. And if you see that, you realize, wow, this is an incredibly beneficial technology to somebody who needs it. The problem though is when we start using it to get into like becoming much more like soldiers or something like that. And again, that can be very useful too. I would love to climb Mount Everest with an exoskeleton suit. And that's one of the great, I think dreams I might have of that kind of thing. But at the same time, it's like, again, we're entering this brand new world with AI. So I'm not sure if everything's AI controlled as opposed to you just controlling with your own muscles, but maybe they'll come across like an exoskeleton suit that's only analog, like it's not ones and zeros, or it's not Wi-Fi oriented. But the problem is, even the artificial hips and stuff like that they're putting in people now, a lot of it is now becoming more and more technologically invasive, meaning that you're able to follow it through Wi-Fi, you're able to scan it. Even like, for example, the classic one was, well, this is a long time ago, Dick Cheney had a heart valve that was Wi-Fi, and you have to turn that off when he went to give speeches so people didn't hack it. It presents a big giant problem if all the time we want to worry about being hacked, or we want to worry about AI, maybe not even hacking us, just knowing everything we're doing.
It's a good point. Yeah. What are your thoughts on like the longevity escape velocity? Because I'm doing everything possible. I don't feel like I'm necessarily afraid of death. I just enjoy life. That's kind of how I approach longevity. And my big thing is calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis, and basically, making sure that macroautophagy can happen in the lysosome of the cell, and just supplementing right and stuff like that. But I'm 36. How old do you think how many more years before like we don't have to worry about?
Well, I would dying. I would be highly surprised if you have to worry about it. I think your biggest challenge already is just not dying from something obscure like a car accident, or maybe a randomly accidentally getting cancer somehow or something like that. I think most 36-year-olds have a very solid chance, at least that they live in the United States, of having technologies available to them by the time they're 55, 60 that enable them to live indefinitely and already start reversing aging. I'm 51, not in the greatest health. I mean, good health. My father died at about 73. So, in that sense, if I have 16, 18, 17 years, whatever, I may be very close to the cut. And it may be harder to reverse aging on a 7-year-old than it is, let's say, a 50-year-old. Right now I'm quite healthy, to be honest. I go for a run and surf and all that. But my father's health had started to deteriorate at this age, so we'll see. So I think you're in a good boat, but the best thing I can say for health still, despite all my love of transhumanism, is just eat right. Try not to eat too many poisons, eat organic and stuff like that. You can, and work the hell out, and work out a lot. Like, take care of your body. I'm a big into surfing. I go jogging every single day. Those are the things that make a difference. And I went to my doctor recently, and and I said, well, how do I know I don't have heart problems? He says, you run every day. I said, yeah, I run for 30 minutes. He's like, you don't have heart problems if you run for 30 minutes, period. Because if you can run for 30 minutes, you're okay. And it's not to mean that something terrible can't happen in a 1 in a million. Obviously it can. But he's like, generally speaking, if you can run 30 minutes, jog 30 minutes, you have a good heart still. And so those are the things that I'm still doing, despite a lot of like Ray Kurzweil and all these people taking 100 pills a day. I think that's great. They're probably onto something, but it's expensive and it takes a lot of research. I'm just into eating right and exercising all the time, and trying to keep weight down. I think one thing that's really important is totally, and I'm really upset at our culture for this idea of fat shaming. Nobody's fat shaming anybody, at least not in my perspective. But there's no question that if you're overweight, you have a higher chance of dying from some type of disease. So the very best thing you can do is stay within the perfect weight limit of yourself and try to be healthy. And that's in no way a fat shaming situation. It's just a statistical fact. You have a far higher chance of dying from heart disease or diabetes or something if you are an obese person. And so stay away from McDonald's, stay away from, foods, chips and things like that. Eat the green stuff, eat mostly greens, in fact, and so I think that's just solid advice. But unfortunately, our culture is trying to make it so that everything is allowed. And what they're doing is really harming children and harming people that think, oh, it's okay to go to McDonald's every single day. It's not okay to go to McDonald's even more than once a year.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a wood burning sauna here, currently 100% off grid. And I'm a huge fan of sweating in the sauna. And, Russians have been doing it for all over the world, right? It's such an easy way. I think it's my favorite form of detox it's just sweating when you're sitting down, not working out. And great advice that you shared. I think all that's well, awesome.
I think like the sauna thing is perfect. I think the natural methods are the best method. And I think the best thing really, in addition to what I've just said, is that you got to want it. You got to want to be healthy.
Yeah.
If you're just like, I sit and watch football all day and eat chips and drink beer and go to McDonald's, then obviously you're not going to live very long. But if you want to be healthy and you go out there and you want to go on hikes, you want to do saunas and you want to take different supplements, all that stuff, it's really a mindset. I like, hey, I want to live longer. I like being healthy. When I go surfing, if I'm getting old enough where if I surf double overhead waves, it becomes a challenge to survive because I can't hold my breath as long as I used to when I was 30. So I stay fit, sort of like Fight Club. I stay fit because I might have to fight for my life while surfing. And those are good, positive things in one's life to try to stay active and healthy.
Mm-hmm. I love it. My friend John asked a good question. He sent in, what are your thoughts on Joshua Haldeman, Elon's grandfather? I guess that was a huge inspiration.
Yeah. Well, so is this the story that people wanted his DNA, his sperm, or something like
so.
that?
Yeah.
Well, I thought about it. I laughed at that a little bit. I do think DNA is very important, but I also think at the same time it's really what your upbringing is, who your parents are, who your social friends are. If you're given an advantage, I'm actually more of a believer that an individual makes themselves. And so there is a genetic component. Don't get me wrong. Like if you come from two Olympians, you're obviously going to be bound to be good at sports probably. But if you have a higher probability, but I don't think that means you're going to be an Olympian at all. I still think you got to work your butt off to get to that level. So I think the same thing, you can have good genes and maybe that gives you a 5 or 10% advantage, but you could just as well get in a terrible car accident when you're 17 and then be limping or something. And now you don't get the job, or now something like, so there are way other bigger factors. So I don't think I personally would be searching for, genes of something like that as saying that's going to guarantee success. I think success comes from a much better environment, or an environment that is conducive to that success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My longevity strategy number one is just keeping stress low and, not living a stressful life, whether that's environment, relationships, work. Just kind of taking inventory of all of that and keeping stress levels low. And of course, going in periods of high stress, but for the most part, low stress. And I noticed on Facebook, I saw you were taking a wine bath. I want to ask you about, because it's funny with alcohol in my community, they're like, it's poison. There's no benefits to it at all. I've seen my research. There is benefits. It actually detoxifies lipofusk in small amounts. I'm talking about like a shot a day or less. So there are provable benefits to ethanol. And now, you can mitigate it. There's acetaldehyde and there are problems with it. But to say there are zero benefits to it, people that have lived into their over 100, they were smoking and drinking alcohol, right? A lot of those people.
Yeah. Well, I think, so first off, I own a couple of vineyards in Bordeaux, Argentina, and Napa Valley. And so we were in Georgia recently speaking at LibertyCon Europe, which is a really fun Liberty festival. And so I had a chance to go look at the old Soviet country of Georgia just last week with my family. And it was wonderful. But Georgia is actually the cradle of wine countries. The wine was first created in that old Soviet country. And so I took wine baths and did the whole wine tour. But I think what's really important to understand is that, so for example, one of the Argentine vineyard that I have is run by a Swiss investor. And he was like 70 years old, and he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, look, you're 70, you really got to quit smoking. So he's like, okay, I'm going to finally do it. Because he's like, you're going to have lung cancer. Within a week of that, he had a heart attack. And he went back, and the doctor's like, look, I think maybe quitting smoking is too dramatic. So maybe it's okay to smoke a little bit to balance this. Because he said, I cannot live without cigarettes after 40 years. The point here is that I drink, and I drink pretty much every night. It's kind of a well-known fact, but not too much. But I drink to take stress away. And I don't know of another method. I've tried meditation. I've tried other things. I exercise like a lot, but I think for me, it's very important to come back and have a glass of scotch or a glass of wine or two. And I'll do it every night. And it's probably deteriorating from my overall lifespan, but I'm not sure that I believe it's beneficial to my overall life and the strategy I have on a day-to-day basis. So every person has to decide what's good for them. I know people that like absolutely will not drink any alcohol at all, and I find them kind of fanatical. And I'm like, well, maybe just go out and have a good time sometimes. I mean, sometimes it is okay to sit on a couch, drink a beer, and watch a football game. Especially if that's like what calms you down, maybe that's better for your cells and better for longevity. And I'm quite convinced that having a glass of wine at night is actually better for my longevity, because I often have such stressful days that that's the only thing that sort of makes me even sleep. And then I'm like, well, sleep's really important. So maybe the glass of wine is actually more important to have, even if there are a few little detrimental effects to it. So everyone has to make that choice. Obviously, I'm not suggesting drinking alcohol every night to your listeners here, but some people do. And I think of my friend who they were told to stop smoking, like he was unable to do so. So he continues to smoke. And I think, for him, it's a game between when do I get lung cancer versus the other 10 years that he has left. Are they fruitful? Are they prosperous? What does he do? Everyone has to make those own choices.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. There's so much bio-individuality, right? If alcoholism and addiction runs in the family and it changes your relationship, then yeah, obviously don't drink. But I think a lot of people can do it consistently and be totally fine.
There we go. I'm just gonna say one more time. And my wife, because I'm in a marriage, and marriage is what it is. You have to deal with people every day. Also encourages this, because we mellow out and makes everybody a bit happier. And happy wife, happy life. So there are other things involved too. It's not even just one's personal health. It's maybe how you treat your kids. You're not so overwhelming. You're not so, and so there are other reasons too. I feel like I've thought a lot about this. I really feel like alcohol has been a very beneficial thing in my life. Not sure how I would do without it, given all these dynamics. Sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to bring out that other one point.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, it's funny you brought up smoking, because I really enjoy cigars, and I'm very public about that. And I don't encourage everybody to smoke, but I think it's way better than cigarettes. And I mitigate the damage with vitamin C and vitamin E. If you search vitamin C and vitamin E smoking, I mean, you'll see tons of studies that it protects the arteries and not only the lungs. So yeah, I think you have to enjoy life. That's kind of the thing we have to interject in this conversation, right? You can't be, because I met people that are just so serious, and they're too serious. And I think that's where you harm your longevity, right?
Yes. No, I think, that's exactly what happened with my friend who stopped smoking, which was, yes, he probably should have stopped when he was 40, but he couldn't stop without his heart collapsing at 70 because he was so used to it and so addicted. So you have to say, well, what is the maximum way to get a good life, still be prosperous? And he had to accept that, taking a few cigarettes a day was the best way to move forward, even if it seemed, even on the outside, the doctor would not recommend that. And, again, it's everyone makes their personal choices.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I know you're short on time, so where can people check out your stuff? Is just your full name.com? Is that a good resource?
Yes. So ZoltanIstvan.com. My website's recently been redone with a lot of my other stuff, pre-transhumanism with National Geographic and some of the books. I also, just so you know, I have somebody who is actually has a kind of a terminal disease. He did his PhD in Ireland on partly my book, The Transhumanist Wager. And then we approached each other later and said, well, why don't I write a biography on some of the work, especially my presidential campaigns? So I actually have a biography coming out in literally 7 weeks called Transhuman Citizen, Zoltan Istvan's Hunt for Immortality. And hopefully we're going to get we already have big reviews coming out, one from Forbes. I was just got a commitment from Newsweek last night as well. So nice. We have some big reviews coming out. So it's going to be very interesting to have a biography out there. The guy who wrote the book is not a fan of mine, but he is a fan of trying to live as long as possible because he's actually has a terminal disease. But it's still, so it's a good book in the sense that it doesn't bash me too often, but tells the journey that I've been on trying to achieve an indefinite lifespan. And I think if your listeners really want to find another place, the documentary Immortality or Bust, which is on Amazon Prime in the United States for free, or on Plex TV for free internationally, they can find that. And that's an hour-and-a-half documentary on my Immortality Bus tour. I'm not sure. Are you in it? Maybe I don't know.
I think I'm in a section where you're standing around in San Diego, and I think Rowan filmed that, right? Was it?
Yes. Anyways, if you want to see that, and that's not like really about my life. That's more about the presidential campaign. It's a bit zany. It's a bit comical. My father dies, unfortunately, during it, but the
Oh,
two
wow.
stories are juxtaposed. And so it makes it a meaningful story amongst me trying to run for the presidency, which of course had no chance of winning. But we were getting a lot of publicity, and it was interesting to try to introduce a lot of people in the United States to the first time they'd ever heard about overcoming death with science. And so that was really the idea of that documentary. And the documentary did really good, won awards and everything else. So we're really, so it's called Immortality or Bust. If you're, and it's free generally most places, if your people want to find it. And we were excited that Amazon Prime actually picked it up.
That's super cool. Well, Zoltan, I look forward to having another conversation with you, maybe in a year or two. I'm sure things are just going to keep growing exponentially, right, with development. So
Yeah. I mean, we'll see how this goes. Maybe we'll do it in our brains one day.
Well, this was awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, and stick around as I close out the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
That was a really fun conversation, and I hope it inspired you guys like it did me to think more about the future and ponder these things, because I think it's coming up quick, like I said in the introduction. And this is all intimately related to our health. I would encourage you to avoid knee-jerk reactions to these new technologies coming out. Approach them with an inquisitive mind. Yes, a skeptical mind. Don't just accept everything blindly from Apple or Tesla or whatever company. But I think people are coming at it too much from an emotional angle instead of a logical angle. I've experimented with a bunch of stuff the last few years. I remember getting one of those robot cleaners. It might have been Roomba or a different brand, and it would turn on randomly outside of the schedule that I set. So that went into the trash. I got rid of it. And then I've played around with the Wi-Fi controlled lights you can find at like Best Buy. But I don't think I can get on board with like the Apple Home thing where you talk to it like Alexa or these voice assistants in the home where it's always listening. My family's used that. I think my dad has Siri. And I remember years ago, we're sitting at dinner having a conversation, and Siri activates just randomly without even saying the word Siri. And that always bugged me. So I don't like the constant listening or the constant watching. I remember there was a scandal. If you look up Roomba camera on YouTube, they were recording the footage that these robot cleaners were taking and mapping out people's houses and using that to strategically market to people based on what the Roomba saw in their home. So there are definitely downsides to this technology. I'm not saying blindly accept it and go with it 100%, but I see people doing the opposite where they're just rejecting it 100% without looking into it at all and any potential benefits. And I think that is the real issue. Personally, I have an electric UTV, I have an electric snowmobile. I love them both because they're relatively quiet. And me living rurally in the mountains where I don't hear planes, I don't hear cars, occasionally I'll hear gunshots, but it's quiet for the most part. I love to keep that quiet. And yes, I have my diesels and there's upsides and downsides to that form of fuel, but there's huge upsides to electric lawnmowers, even electric chainsaws. Because if you have solar power, you can power those yourself. You don't need to rely on an external source. And that solar car I mentioned, I am a huge fan of. It's called Aptera. I actually sat in one when I was living in San Diego for the short time last year. And if they make it, I really hope they do. That is an incredible, sustainable car that is the most efficient car on the road. It's going to be self-powered, especially if you live in Texas or Southern California, or even in North Idaho, even with winter, because for half the year, at least, we have significant sun. And by the way, if we have any backpackers or just tech enthusiasts out there, I'm always looking at these websites like Kickstarter for new health technologies. And sometimes they don't make it, but a lot of the time they do. And the two exoskeleton companies that I was kind of referring to in the show, one was Hypershell, and the other one is DNSYSX1. Not as cool of a name as Hypershell. But I should have both of those by June, and I'll be testing them out. And I think just for the reason alone of being able to run faster, that alone is super cool. But if you're backpacking, you're hiking into the woods several hours, and you just want to get a break, you can keep moving with this battery operated leg assist. I think that's going to be incredible, and I'm super excited for it. And I consider it a powerful health technology because you can still get your workout in. You could just go further than you could before. So those are the things I'm most excited about for the next year. The exosuit, at least just for the legs, and then the solar car. I think those are going to be game changers. And maybe the most interesting one as it relates to human health is the ChatGPT thing. But maybe it's not ChatGPT, but another AI system deciphering clinical studies. Because as it stands now, we have the Andrew Hubermans, biohackers, guys in the natural health space. They'll often use clinical studies as a launch point for their whole 15-minute YouTube video or 2-hour podcast, just going through different studies. But I don't think the human mind is designed or even capable of taking the whole wide breadth of research and condensing it into usable, true statements about human health. I really think that will be the job of AI if the gatekeepers allow it, or if someone creates a system, which hopefully happens, that looks at thousands and thousands of clinical studies that were done on vitamin A, because everyone's all about vitamin A toxicity now, which I think is BS and overblown, or these different substances that people question the safety of, and really just get down to the truth. I think that might be the best application of artificial intelligence. And instead of human run studies and human design studies, maybe AI designed and run studies will be far superior and much more accurate. There are just so many possibilities, and I'm a fan of AI. I'm excited about it. I grew up on Star Wars. I loved the first 6 movies. It went downhill when Disney took over, obviously, but I am a big fan of droids. I can't wait to have one. And I think they're just going to be a game changer for our lives. If you want to check out Zoltan's work, you can go to zoltanistvan.com. I'll put the link below. Also, check out his YouTube. He has a lot of great videos on there. As I mentioned, the Immortality Bus. If you look up the old footage of that, you'll likely see me on there. And I hope you enjoyed possibly the most controversial podcast episode I've ever done. If you want to check out my website, you can go to matt-blackburn.com. I have my CLF protocol up there. I have all of my recommended products. I've really been loving the zeolite that's on the front page. It's the supercharged zeolite from Zeolite Labs. I've been doing a deep dive into heavy metal toxicity, and I've been looking into this for 14 years, but I've never really gotten into binders. And if I did, it was the nano liquid zeolite, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know the efficacy of it. And then I found Jeff Hoyt, the owner of Zeolite Labs, had a 2-hour interview with him on his product, ZeoCharge. And I've been just blown away with how I've felt on it. And I've actually combined it recently with the test that he recommends, which is not HTMA, but he recommends something called the Iligo scan, something I'm actually becoming a practitioner with as of today, which uses photospectrometry to basically shine light through the palm of your hand, your non-dominant hand, because it's less calloused. And it will give you a readout, an accurate readout of your heavy metal status, your vitamin, your mineral status. And I did 2 tests back to back, and they were almost identical, which really blew me away because every conference I've ever been to, and I would do these different scans, the Zyto, there's a million different ones. The results would be different every time. So to have the results almost identical 2 hours apart, I was just floored. So I immediately looked into, getting my own device, getting my own account. I'll be scanning my friends and people that are in the area here in North Idaho because I think it's a game changer, and it was absolutely accurate with what I'm supplementing, what I've been going through personally, and just the readout was spot on. And I definitely put more stake in this now than HTMA because it's easier. You get your results immediately. You don't have to clip your hair off. And I just question the whole mineral balancing program approach that's trendy right now. I think you can get there with zeolite, especially the Zeolite Labs product, with high dose melatonin, maybe the Mitolife Panacea Shilajit, add in sweating in a sauna. And I'm really excited to see what happens to my aluminum levels. And I had silver slightly elevated, which is weird because I'm not taking colloidal silver, but aluminum and silver were the most elevated metals for me. And I am enjoying carbonated beverages out of aluminum cans quite often. So I wonder if that's playing a role. Obviously, I enjoy cigars. There's cadmium in cigars, and that was slightly elevated. But I'm all about mitigation. I think you can still enjoy life if you're mitigating it properly. So I'll report back if my metals go down. Definitely listen to the show that I did with Jeff Hoyt because this stuff is really misunderstood. You think intuitively if your metals go up on your second test, you're getting worse or the product's contaminated. But he educates a lot that there's 3 levels of detox. And as you're liberating stuck metals in your tissues, like your organs that have been there for decades, your metals will go up, but eventually they will come down. And that's where you know that you're on the right program. So I'm taking 6 scoops a day, once to twice a day of the Zeolite Labs, which is a super, super mega dose. But I feel incredible and I'm going to stay on it for a while. My brand is Mitolife. You can find that at mitolife.co. We're currently having a Mother's Day sale, so no coupon code required. Just head over to mitolife.co and save 20% on all of our products. That includes our 7-stage water filter, our grounding sheet, shampoo and conditioner. And then a lot of our supplements are already discounted. So the zinc, the melatonin, the dairy absorb, which is a lactase enzyme if you have problem digesting dairy, the spore-based probiotic, the digestive enzymes, you basically save double on all of those. And frequently asked question, when's the vitamin E coming back? That's our best seller. That will be back very soon. I would say by mid-May, absolute worst case end of May. But long story short, last year I had 20,000 bottles that leaked. And so I had to reject them, and it delayed our production by several months. So I've been working hard to get the vitamin E, the mixed-tocopherol product back to you guys. So thanks so much for your patience. As always, I recommend stockpiling my products just in case we're out of stock because it does happen. Check out the Mitolife Academy. That's on YouTube. It's $15 a month. You get 2 private videos every month and a live Q&A the last day of every month. I talk about my latest research, latest experiments. My more controversial videos are posted there on different health topics. And I often do giveaways there. I give away health technology or really steep discounts for Mitolife products. So that's all. I'll see you guys next Friday. Stay supercharged.